Mysteries await just a page away. Ready to dive in? Welcome to The Book Reader, where stories unfold one enchanting page at a time. Subscribe now and unlock the magic.
Of The Girl Who Played with Fire by Stieg Larsson.
Part 2. From Russia with Love. January 10th to March 23rd. Chapter 7. Saturday, January 29th to Sunday, February 13th. At around 11 o'clock on Saturday morning, a car drove into Sławelcio between Jarna and Vanierad. The community consisted of no more than 15 buildings, and stopped in front of the last building, about 500 feet outside the village proper. It was a tumble-down industrial structure that had once been a printing factory but now had a sign over the main door identifying it as Sławelcio Motorcycle Club. There was no other car in sight. Nevertheless, the driver looked around carefully before he got out of his car. He was huge and blond. The air was cold. He put on brown leather gloves and took a black sports bag from the trunk. He was not worried about being observed. It would be impossible to park close to the old printing factory without being seen. If any police or government unit wanted to keep the building under surveillance, they would have to equip their people with camouflage and telescopes and dig them in at the far end of a field. Inevitably, that would be talked about by the villagers, and 3 of the houses were owned by Sławelcio MC members. On the other hand, he did not want to go inside the building. The police had raided the clubhouse on several occasions, and no one could be sure whether or not bugging equipment had been hidden there. This meant that conversation inside was pretty much about cars, girls, and beer, and sometimes about which stocks were good to invest in. So the man waited until Carl Magnus Lundin came out to the yard. Maggie Lundin was club president. He was tall with a slim build, but over time he had acquired a hefty beer belly. He was only 36. He had dark blonde hair in a ponytail and wore black jeans, boots, and a heavy winter jacket. He had 5 counts on his police record. 2 of them were for minor drug offenses, 1 for receiving stolen goods, and 1 for stealing a car and drunk driving. The 5th charge, the most serious, had sent him to prison for a year. It was for grievous bodily harm when, several years ago, he had gone berserk in a bar in Stockholm. Lundin and his huge visitor shook hands and walked slowly along the fence around the yard. "It's been a few months," Lundin said. The man said, "We've got a deal going down. 3,060 grams of methamphetamine." "Same terms as last time?" 50-50. Lundin pulled a pack of cigarettes out of his breast pocket. He liked doing business with the giant. Meth brought a street price of between 160 and 230 kroner per gram, depending on availability. So 3,060 grams would yield a cut value of about 600,000 kroner. Sławelcio MC would distribute the 3 kilos in batches of about 250 grams each to known dealers. At that stage, the price would drop to somewhere between 120 and 130 kroner per gram. It was an exceptionally attractive deal for Sławelcio MC. Unlike deals with other suppliers, there was never any crap about advance payment or fixed prices. The blonde giant supplied the goods and demanded 50%, an entirely reasonable share of the revenue. They knew more or less what a kilo of meth would bring in. The exact amount depended on to what extent Lundin could get away with cutting the stuff. It could vary by a few thousand one way or the other, but when the deal was done, the giant would collect around 190,000 kroner. They had done a lot of business together over the years, always using the same system. Lundin knew that the giant could have doubled his take by handling the distribution himself. He also knew why the man accepted a lower profit. He could stay in the background and let Sławelcio MC have all the risk. He made a smaller but a safer income. And unlike with all other suppliers he had ever come across, it was a relationship that was based on sound business principles, credit, and goodwill. No hassle, no bullshit, and no threats. The giant had also swallowed a loss of almost 100,000 kroner over a weapons delivery that went bust. Lundin knew no one else in the business who could absorb a loss like that. He was terrified when he'd had to tell him. London explained how the deal had gone sour and how a policeman at the Crime Prevention Center might be about to make a big score off a member of the Aryan Brotherhood in Varmland. But the giant had not so much as raised an eyebrow. He was almost sympathetic. Shit happens. The whole delivery had to be written off. London was not without talents. He understood that a smaller, less risky profit was good business. He had never once considered double-crossing the giant. That would be bad form. The giant and his associates settled for a lower profit so long as the accounting was honest. If he cheated the blonde, he would come calling, and London was convinced that he would not survive such a visit. When can you deliver? The giant dropped his sports bag to the ground. Delivery has been made. London did not feel like opening the bag to check the contents. Instead, he reached out his hand as a sign that they had a deal and he intended to do his part. "There's one more thing," the giant said. "What's that?" "We'd like to put a special job your way." "Let's hear it." He pulled an envelope out of his inside jacket pocket and gave it to London, who opened it and took out a passport photograph and a sheet of A4 containing personal data. He raised his eyebrows inquiringly. "Her name is Lisbeth Salander and she lives in Stockholm, on Lundagatan in Södermalm." "Right. She's probably out of the country at present, but she'll turn up sooner or later." "Okay. My employer would like to have a quiet talk with her. She has to be delivered alive. We suggest that warehouse near Ingern. And we need someone to clean up afterwards. She has to disappear without a trace." "We should be able to handle that." "How will we know when she's home?" "I'll tell you." "And the price?" "What do you say to 10,000 for the whole job? It's pretty straightforward. Drive to Stockholm, pick her up, deliver her to me." They shook hands again. On her second visit to Lundagatan, Salander flopped down on the lumpy sofa to think. She had to make a number of decisions, and one of these was whether or not she should keep the apartment. She lit a cigarette, blew smoke up towards the ceiling, and tapped the ash into an empty Coke can. She had no reason to love this apartment. She had moved in with her mother and her sister when she was 4. Her mother had slept in the living room, and she and Camilla shared the tiny bedroom. When she was 12 and all the evil happened, she was moved to a children's clinic and then, when she was 15, to the first in a series of foster families. The apartment had been rented out by her trustee, Holger Palmgren, who had also seen to it that it was returned to her when she turned 18 and needed a place to live. The apartment had been a fixed point for almost all of her life. Although she no longer needed it, she did not like the idea of selling it. That would mean strangers in her space. The logistical problem was that all her mail, insofar as she received any at all, came to Lundagatan. If she got rid of the apartment, she would have to find another address to use. Salander did not want to be an official entry in all the databases. In this regard, she was almost paranoid. She had no reason to trust the authorities, or anyone else for that matter. She looked out at the firewall of the back courtyard, as she had done her whole life. She was suddenly glad of her decision to leave the apartment. She had never felt safe there. Every time she turned onto Lundagatan and approached the street door, sober or not, she had been acutely aware of her surroundings, of parked cars and passers-by. She felt sure that somewhere out there were people who wished her harm, and they would most probably attack her as she came or went from the apartment. There had been no attack. But that did not mean that she could relax. The address on Lundagatan was on every public register and database, and in all those years she had never had the means to improve her security. She could only stay on her guard. Now the situation was different. She did not want anyone to know her new address in Mosebach. Instinct warned her to remain as anonymous as possible. But that did not solve the problem of what to do with the old apartment. She brooded about it for a while and then took out her mobile and called Mimi. Hi, it's me. Hi, Lisbeth. So you make contact after only a week this time? I'm at Lundageton. Okay. I was wondering if you'd like to take over the apartment. What do you mean? You live in a shoebox. I like my shoebox. Are you moving? It's empty here. Mimi seemed to hesitate at the other end of the line. Lisbeth, I can't afford it. It's a housing association apartment and it's all paid off. The rent is $1,480 a month, which must be less than you're paying for the shoebox. And the rent has been paid for a year. But are you thinking of selling it? I mean, it must be worth quite a bit. About $1.5 million, if you can believe the estate agent's ads. I can't afford that. I'm not selling. You could move in here tonight, you can live here as long as you like, and you won't have to pay anything for a year. I'm not allowed to rent it out, but I can write you into my agreement as my roommate. That way you won't have any hassle with the housing association. But Lisbeth, are you proposing to me? Mimi laughed. I'm not using the apartment and I don't want to sell it. You mean I could live there for free, girl? Are you serious? Yes. For how long? As long as you like. Are you interested? Of course I am. I don't get offered a free apartment in the middle of Soder every day of the week. There's a catch. I thought as much. You can live here as long as you like, but I'll still be listed as resident and I'll get my mail here. All you have to do is take in the mail and let me know if anything interesting turns up. Lisbeth, you're the freakiest. Where are you going to live? We'll talk about that later, Salander said. They agreed to meet that afternoon so that Mimi could have a proper look at the apartment. Salander was already in a much better mood. She walked down to Handelsbanken on Hornsgaten, where she took a number and waited her turn. She showed her ID and explained that she had been abroad for some time and wanted to know the balance of her savings account. The sum was 82,670 kroner. The account had been dormant for more than a year, and one deposit of 9,312 kroner had been made the previous autumn. That was the inheritance from her mother. Salander withdrew 9,312 kroner. She wanted to spend the money on something that would have made her mother happy. She walked to the post office on Rosenlandsgaten and sent an anonymous deposit to one of Stockholm's crisis centers for women. It was 8 o'clock on Friday evening when Berger shut down her computer and stretched. She had spent 9 hours solid putting the finishing touches on the March issue of Millennium, and since Eriksson was working full-time on Svensson's themed issue, she had had to do a good part of the editing herself. Cortez and Karim had helped out, but they were primarily writers and researchers, and not used to editing. So she was tired and her back ached, but she was satisfied both with the day and with life in general. The accountant's graphs were pointing in the right direction, articles were coming in on time, or at least not unmanageably late, and the staff was happy. After more than a year, they were still on a high from the adrenaline rush of the Wennerström affair. After trying for a while to massage her neck, Berger decided she needed a shower and thought about using the one in the office bathroom. But she felt too lazy and put her feet up on the desk instead. She was going to turn 45 in 3 months, and that famous future she had longed for was starting to be a thing of the past. She had developed a network of tiny wrinkles and lines around her eyes and mouth, but she knew that she still looked good. She worked out at the gym twice a week, but she had noticed it was getting more difficult to climb the mast during her long sailing trips. And she was the one who always had to do the climbing. Her husband had terrible vertigo. Berger reflected that her first 45 years, despite a number of ups and downs, had been by and large successful. She had money, status, a home which gave her great pleasure, and a job she enjoyed. She had a tender-hearted husband who loved her and with whom she was still in love after 15 years of marriage. And on the side she had a pleasant and seemingly inexhaustible lover, who might not satisfy her soul but who did satisfy her body when she needed it. She smiled as she thought of Blomkvist. She wondered when he was going to come clean and tell her that he was sleeping with Harriet Vanger. Neither of them had breathed a word about their relationship, but Berger wasn't born yesterday. At the board meeting in August, she had noticed a glance that passed between them. Out of sheer cussedness, she had tried both of their mobile numbers later that evening, and both were turned off. That was hardly watertight evidence, of course, but after subsequent board meetings, Blomkvist was always unavailable in the evening. It was almost comical to watch the way Vanger would leave after dinner with the same excuse, that she had to go to bed early. Berger did not pry, and she was not jealous. On the other hand, she would certainly tease them both about it at some suitable occasion. She never got involved in Blomkvist's affairs with other women, but she hoped that his affair with Vanger would not give rise to problems on the board. Yet she was not really worried. Blomkvist had all manner of terminated relationships behind him, and he was still on friendly terms with most of the women involved. Berger was incredibly happy to be Blomkvist's friend and confidant. In certain ways he was a fool, and in others so insightful that he seemed like an oracle. But he had never understood her love for her husband, had never been able to grasp why she considered Gregor Beckman such an enchanting person. Warm, exciting, generous, and above all without many of the traits that she so detested in most men. Beckman was the man she wanted to grow old with. She had wanted to have children with him, but it had not been possible, and now it was too late. But in her choice of a life partner, she could not imagine a better or more stable person, someone she could so completely and wholeheartedly trust and who was always there for her when she needed him. Blomkvist was very different. He was a man with such shifting traits that he sometimes appeared to have multiple personalities. As a professional, he was obstinate and almost pathologically focused on the job at hand. He took hold of a story and worked his way forward to the point where it approached perfection, and then he tied up all the loose ends. When he was at his best, he was brilliant, and when he was not at his best, he was still far better than the average. He seemed to have an almost intuitive gift for deciding which story was hiding a skeleton in the closet and which story would turn into a dull, run-of-the-mill piece. She had never regretted working with him. Nor had she ever regretted becoming his lover. The only person who understood Berger's passion for sex with Blomkvist was her husband, and he understood it because she dared to discuss her needs with him. It was not a matter of infidelity, but of desire. Sex with Blomkvist gave her a kick that no other man was able to give her, including her husband. Sex was important to her. She had lost her virginity when she was 14 and spent a great part of her teenage years in a frustrated search for fulfillment. She had tried everything, from heavy petting with classmates and an awkward affair with a teacher to phone sex and fetishism. She had experimented with most of what interested her in eroticism. She had toyed with bondage and been a member of Club Extreme, which arranged parties of the kind that were not socially acceptable. On several occasions she had tried sex with other women and, disappointed, admitted that it simply was not her thing and that women could not excite her even a fraction as much as a man could. Or two. With Beckman she had explored sex with two men, one of them a famous gallery owner, and discovered both that her mate had a strong bisexual inclination and that she herself was almost paralyzed with pleasure at feeling two men simultaneously caressing and satisfying her, just as she experienced a sense of pleasure that was difficult to define when she watched her husband being caressed by another man. She and Beckman had repeated that excitement with the same success with a couple of regular partners. It was not that her sex life with her husband was boring or unsatisfying. It was just that Blomkvist gave her a completely different experience. He had talent. He was quite simply so good that it felt as if she had achieved the optimal balance with Beckman as husband and Blomkvist as lover when needed. She could not do without either of them, and she had no intention of choosing between them. And this was what her husband had understood, that she had a need beyond what he could offer her, even in the form of his most imaginative acrobatic exercises in the jacuzzi. What Berger liked best about her relationship with Blomkvist was the fact that he had no desire whatsoever to control her. He was not the least bit jealous, and even though she herself had had several attacks of jealousy when they first began to go out together 20 years ago, She had discovered that in his case she did not need to be jealous. Their relationship was built on friendship, and in matters of friendship he was boundlessly loyal. It was a relationship that would survive the harshest tests. But it bothered her that so many of her acquaintances still whispered about her relationship with Blomkvist, and always behind her back. Blomkvist was a man. He could go from bed to bed without anyone raising their eyebrows. She was a woman, and the fact that she had a lover, and with her husband's consent, coupled with the fact that she had also been true to her lover for 20 years, resulted in the most interesting dinner conversations. She thought for a moment and then picked up the phone to call her husband. "Hi, darling. What are you doing?" "Writing." Beckman was not just an artist. He was most of all a professor of art history and the author of several books. He often participated in public debate, and he acted as consultant to several large architecture firms. For the past year he had been working on a book about the artistic decoration of buildings and its influence, and why people prospered in some buildings but not in others. The book had begun to develop into an attack on functionalism which, Berger suspected, would cause a furor. "How's it going?" "Good. It's flowing. How about you?" "I just finished the latest issue. It's going to the printer on Thursday." "Well done. I'm wiped out. It sounds like you've got something in mind. Have you planned anything for tonight? Would you be terribly upset if I didn't come home?" "Say hello to Blomkvist and tell him he's tempting fate," said Beckman. "He might like that." "Okay. Then tell him that you're a witch who's impossible to satisfy and he'll end up aging prematurely." "He knows that." "In that case all that's left for me is to commit suicide. I'm going to keep writing until I pass out. Have a good time." Blomkvist was at Svensson and Johansson's place in Enskede, wrapping up a discussion about some details in Svensson's manuscript. She wondered if he was busy tonight, or would he consider giving a massage to an aching back. "You've got the keys," he said. "Make yourself at home." "I will. See you in an hour or so." It took her 10 minutes to walk to Bellmansgaden. She undressed and showered and made espresso. Then she crawled into bed and waited naked and full of anticipation. The optimum gratification for her would probably be a threesome with her husband and Blomkvist, and that would never happen. Blomkvist was so straight that she liked to tease him about being a homophobe. He had zero interest in men. Apparently you could not get everything you wanted in this world. The blonde giant frowned in irritation as he maneuvered the car at 10 miles an hour along a forest road in such bad repair that for a while he thought he must have taken a wrong turn. It was just beginning to get dark when the road finally widened and he caught sight of the cabin. He stopped, turned off the engine, and took a look around. He had about 50 yards to go. He was in the region of Stallerholmen, not far from the town of Marieford. It was a simple 1950s cabin in the middle of the woods. Through a line of trees he could see a strip of ice on Lake Mälaren. He could not imagine why anyone would want to spend their free time in such an isolated place. He felt suddenly uncomfortable when he shut the car door behind him. The forest seemed threatening, as if it were closing in around him. He sensed that he was being watched. He started towards the cabin, but he heard a rustling that made him stop short. He stared into the woods. It was dusk, silent with no wind. He stood there for 2 minutes with his nerves on full alert before, seeing it out of the corner of his eye, he realized that a figure was silently, slowly moving in the trees. When his eyes focused, he saw that the figure was standing perfectly still about 30 yards into the forest, staring at him. He felt a vague panic. He tried to make out details. He saw a dark, bony face. It appeared to be a dwarf, no more than half his own size, and dressed in something that looked like a tunic of pine branches and moss. A forest troll? A leprechaun? He held his breath. He felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. Then he blinked 6 times and shook his head. When he looked again, the creature had moved about 10 yards to the right. There was nobody there. He knew that he was imagining things. And yet he could so clearly make out the figure in the trees. Suddenly it moved and came closer. It seemed to be lurching in a semicircle to get into a position to attack him. The blonde giant hurried to the cabin. He knocked a little too hard on the door. As soon as he heard voices within, his panic subsided. He looked over his shoulder. There was nothing there. But he did not breathe out until the door opened. Björman greeted him courteously and invited him in. Miriam Wu was panting when she arrived back upstairs after dragging the last trash bag of Salander's possessions down to the recycling room in the cellar. The apartment was clinically clean and smelled of soap, paint, and freshly brewed coffee made by Salander. She was sitting on a stool, gazing thoughtfully at the bare rooms from which curtains, rugs, discount coupons on the refrigerator, and her usual junk in the hall had vanished as if by magic. She was amazed at how much bigger the apartment seemed. Mimi and Salander did not have the same taste in clothes, furniture, or intellectual stimulation. Correction. Mimi had taste and definite views on how she wanted her living quarters to look, what kind of furniture she wanted, and what sort of clothes one should wear. Salander had no taste whatsoever, Mimi realized. After she had inspected the apartment on Lundagaten as closely as an estate agent might, they had discussed things and Mimi had decided that most of the stuff had to go. Especially the disgusting dirt-brown sofa in the living room. Did Salander want to keep any of the things? No. Then Mimi had spent a few long days as well as several hours each evening for 2 weeks throwing out bits of old furniture, cleaning cupboards, scrubbing the floor, scouring the bathtub, and repainting the walls in the kitchen, living room, bedroom, and hall. She also varnished the parquet floor in the living room. Salander had no interest in such tasks, but she came several times to watch Mimi at work, fascinated. Eventually the apartment was empty of everything except for a kitchen table of solid wood, much the worse for wear, that Mimi intended to sand down and refinish, 2 stools that Salander had pounced on when an attic in the building was cleared, and a set of sturdy shelves in the living room that Mimi thought she could repaint. I'm moving in this weekend, unless you're going to change your mind. I don't need the apartment. But it's a great apartment. I mean, there are bigger and better apartments, but it's slap in the middle of Soder and the rent is nothing. Lisbeth, you're passing up a fortune by not selling it. I have enough to get by. Mimi shut up, not sure how to interpret Salander's brusque dismissal. Where are you living now? Salander did not reply. Could a person come and visit you? Not right now. Salander opened her shoulder bag, took out some papers, and passed them over to Mimi. I've fixed the agreement with the housing association. The simplest thing is to register you as my roommate and say I'm selling half of the apartment to you. The price is 1 krona. You have to sign the contract. Mimi took the pen and signed the contract, adding her date of birth. Is that all? That's it. Lisbeth, I've always thought that you were a little weird. Do you realize that you just gave away half of this apartment to me? I'd love to have the apartment, but I don't want to end up in a situation where you suddenly regret it or it causes bad feelings between us. There will never be any bad feelings. I want you to live here. It feels right to me. But with nothing in return? You're nuts. You're taking care of my mail. That's the deal. That'll take me an average of 4 seconds a week. Do you intend to come over once in a while to have sex? Salander fixed her eyes on Mimi. She was quiet for a moment. I'd like to very much, but it's not part of the contract. You can say no whenever you want. Mimi sighed. And here I was just beginning to enjoy being a kept woman. You know, having somebody who gives me an apartment and pays my rent and comes over now and then to wrestle around in bed. They sat in silence for a while. Then Mimi stood up resolutely and went into the living room to turn off the bare bulb in the ceiling fixture. Come here. Salander followed her. I've never had sex on the floor of a newly painted apartment with almost no furniture. I saw a movie with Marlon Brando once about a couple in Paris who did it. Salander glanced at the floor. I feel like playing. Are you up for it? Mimi said. I'm almost always up for it. Tonight I think I'll be a dominating bitch. I get to make the decisions. Take off your clothes. Salander smiled a crooked smile. She took off her clothes. It took at least 10 seconds. Lie down on the floor. On your stomach. Salander did as Mimi commanded. The parquet floor was cool and her skin got goosebumps immediately. Mimi used Salander's t-shirt with the slogan "You have the right to remain silent" to tie her hands behind her back. Salander could not help thinking that this was similar to the way Nils fucking slimebag Björman had tied her up 2 years ago. The similarities ended there. With Mimi, Salander felt only lustful anticipation. She was compliant when Mimi rolled her over on her back and spread her legs. Salander watched her in the dim room as she pulled off her own t-shirt, and was fascinated by her soft breasts. Then Mimi tied her t-shirt as a blindfold over Salander's eyes. She could hear the rustle of clothes. A few seconds later she felt Mimi's tongue on her belly and her fingers on the inside of her thighs. She was more excited than she had been in a long time. She shut her eyes tight beneath the blindfold and let Mimi set the pace.
And that marks the end of the current chapter. Thank you for listening to The Book Reader. Stay tuned for the next episode tomorrow. Please subscribe for updates.